The wind cut through the desert like a knife, dry and sharp. Dust clung to the skin, the eyes, the soul. Out there, under the blistering sun and the wide, pitiless sky, a woman stumbled toward the edge of a small, half-forgotten trading post, nestled against the hills. Her boots were torn open at the solace. Her dress hung in strips, sun-bleached and dirt-streaked. Her hair, once long and dark, was now a tangled mess. And her eyes, those hollow, wild eyes, searched for something she hadn't dared to hope for in a long time. Kindness. She collapsed just short of the watering trough outside the general store. A skinny dog sniffed at her and backed away. People peeked through windows but didn't come out. The woman had the look of trouble, of bad luck, of someone with too much past and not enough future. In towns like this, people didn't reach out to the dying. They looked away and locked their doors, except for one man. He stood still as stone under the awning of the blacksmith's shed across the way. He was massive, with skin the color of riverbed clay and black braids that hung past his chest. 2 feathers were tied near his left ear. His arms, thick and scarred, were crossed over his chest. He had the bearing of a warrior, though his tribe had long since stopped going to war. His name was Lone Bear. Few dared speak it out loud. Fewer still dared speak to him. The storekeeper muttered under his breath, "She'd die before sundown." The Apache said nothing. He watched as the woman tried to crawl toward the trough. Her fingers clawed through the dirt, trembling. She was skin and bones. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips cracked. Her legs barely moved now. She was trying to speak, but only dry rasping came out. No one moved to help. And then Lone Bear stepped down from the porch. His boots hit the ground with quiet finality, and the people inside held their breath. The big man knelt beside the woman, lifting her like she weighed no more than a sack of feathers. Her head lolled against his chest. She barely registered the motion, only the warmth, and the fact that for the first time in what felt like forever, someone had touched her without disgust. He carried her through town in silence. No one dared stop him. He brought her not to the town's tiny clinic, but to the shack on the edge of the canyon, his home, carved into the rock like an old wound. There, he laid her on his bedroll, lit a fire, and spooned broth between her lips until her body stopped shaking. It took 2 days before she could whisper her name. "Ella," she said, voice like wind-blown ash. "Ella Grace, from nowhere." He nodded. "You're safe here." She looked around. The place was simple, clean. 1 bedroll, 1 saddlebag, 1 rifle on the wall, a carving knife and a fire pit. No woman's touch, no child's toys. Just emptiness in him. "Why'd you help me?" she asked on the 3rd day, when she could sit upright. Nobody else would. He didn't answer at first. Instead, he poured her tea from a kettle over the fire. Then he said the words that would shape the rest of her life. "Because I'm heirless," he said. "And you're alone." She stared at him. "What's that supposed to mean?" He met her gaze. "I have land, I have bloodline, but no one to carry it forward. You have nothing but a heart that won't quit. I saw it in the way you crawled, how you fought to stay alive. I want you to be my woman. Bear me a child. We save each other, or we die alone." She blinked, stunned. She'd been offered coin before, flesh for favor, but never this, never a home, never a future. Her instinct was to say no, to believe it was a cruel trick. But in his eyes, she saw no hunger, no lust, only a solemn truth. He didn't just see her as broken, he saw her as worthy, and so began a story neither of them expected, of survival, healing, and a love deeper than words. The desert winds whispered names of the forgotten, but one name still stirred caution and quiet respect among those who remembered older times. Lone Bear. He was the last of his bloodline, Born to a proud Apache family that once roamed the canyons freely, feared by enemies and honored by kin. Now he stood alone on the remnants of land that had once belonged to a people land bought back piece by piece after betrayal. War and death had carved away nearly everything else. He didn't speak much, not to the townsfolk, not to traders, not to the few Apache elders who still lived in the far ridges. He lived between worlds, too Indian for the settlers, too changed by the world to be fully one of the tribe. His silence wasn't just habit, it was armor. His days were filled with survival, not purpose. Hunt, haul water, tend to the stubborn patch of ground that yielded beans and corn when it wasn't being baked to death by the sun. The land needed hands, but his were the only ones left. His brothers were gone, one to disease, the other to whiskey and sorrow. His wife, well, there had been a woman once. She had loved him before the world turned hard. But childbirth had taken her, and the child with her. That was when he stopped speaking for nearly a year. But now, as he watched the frail woman named Ella slowly return to life in his shelter, something old stirred in him again. It wasn't romance, it wasn't desire, it was instinct. She fought to live, and that meant something to him. She asked few questions. She slept most days, eating in silence, eyes still scanning the corners like someone who'd learned to expect. Cruelty. Lone Bear didn't press her. He let her sit by the fire, gave her space, offered simple, practical help bandaging her feet, placing clean clothes beside her bedroll, boiling water for her hair. But what shocked her most was what she didn't hear. No demands, no judgment, no conditions shouted from across the room. Just quiet strength. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the canyon wall, Ella asked him softly, "Why don't you have anyone?" "No wife, no family." He stirred the fire. "Because life took them." She nodded. "And you never looked for someone else?" He looked at her then, and the firelight revealed something she hadn't seen before, not anger or coldness, but sorrow that had worn itself into stillness. "I looked," he said. "But the land is hard, and I got harder." She understood that. She had hardened too. It was the only way to survive when kindness became a luxury you couldn't afford. The next day, he returned from hunting with a fresh rabbit and laid it on the table. She had started to cook for him without being asked. Simple stews, careful portions, nothing wasted. It felt strange, comforting even, to see a rhythm return to his home. A woman's presence had changed everything without a single romantic word being exchanged. After supper, he stood at the door and looked at the night sky. The stars were heavy that evening, low and bright, as if the universe itself was leaning close to listen. "I meant what I said," he told her, his voice low. "You're alone. I'm Heirless. That doesn't have to be our story." She looked up from the fire. "You don't even know what I've done, where I came from." "I don't need to know your past," he said, "only your spirit." "And if I say no?" He nodded. "Then I give you food, shelter, safe place. And when you're strong enough to go, you go." It wasn't a trap. It wasn't even persuasion. It was a choice, and that stunned her more than any proposal ever could. Lone Bear was a man with nothing left to prove. He didn't need her, but he chose her. Not for beauty, not for usefulness, but because he saw something in her that echoed inside himself resilience. That night, Ella lay on her side beneath the woven blanket he'd given her, staring into the fire. She felt warmer than she had in years, not just because of the food or the shelter, but because, for the first time in her life, someone didn't see her as a burden. He saw her as a beginning. The morning air was crisp, the sky a canvas of pale orange and lavender as the sun climbed slowly above the ridgelines. Ella stood outside Lone Bear's shelter, the wool blanket draped around her shoulders. The canyon was quiet at this hour only. The soft coo of a mourning dove echoed across the rocks. The silence had become her friend, and yet it made her uneasy. Too many years had passed with noisemen yelling, boots on wooden floors, doors slamming, laughter that never included her. Here, the silence felt too kind. Behind her, Lone Bear emerged from the shelter, already dressed for the day. He carried his bow over one shoulder and a satchel of dried meat in his hand. His presence always seemed to absorb sound. Even when he moved, it was like the land bent around him. Ella turned. "Going hunting again?" He nodded. "The meat's running low. I'll bring back enough for a week." She hesitated before asking, "Why don't you trade with the town more? You've got good land, strong arms. You could sell, make coin." "I don't need their coin," he said simply. Coin doesn't carry a name forward. That line puzzled her. She stepped down from the ledge and joined him as he saddled his horse. "What do you mean by that?" He paused, tying a bundle behind the saddle. Then he turned to her, eyes unreadable. "You asked why I helped you. I told you. You're alone. And I'm heirless." She shook her head slowly, almost smiling. "I still don't get it. That's not usually how men start a conversation with a woman. I'm not most men." "No," she said, voice dry. "You're not." He leaned against a rock and folded his arms across his chest. "I'm not looking for a bed partner. Or a servant. I've had both. I've buried more than I've spoken to. But what I don't have is someone to carry my blood, to build a life with, not because I demand it, but because we choose it." Ella's brows furrowed. "You want me to be your woman?" "Yes." "To give you a child?" "Yes." "Just like that?" He didn't flinch. "Not just like that. You'd have to agree. I won't take what's not freely given. But I've watched you. How you don't flinch from hard work. How you survived when most wouldn't. You've got spirit, fire. You're not weak no matter what you think." Ella crossed her arms now, blanket still clinging to her shoulders. "You don't know anything about me. I know enough. I was a cleaner in a brothel," she said coldly. "Until one night I got mistaken for one of the women upstairs. I fought back. They beat me for it. I ran. That's how I ended up crawling into your dirt like a dog." He didn't blink. "Doesn't change what I see." She narrowed her eyes. "And what do you see, Lone Bear?" He didn't hesitate. "A woman who still has a soul left, despite the world trying to rip it out of her." The words landed harder than any blow. Ella turned away, staring at the sunrise. Her throat burned, her eyes stung, and not from the cold. No man had ever said something like that to her. No man had ever seen her as something more than used up or inconvenient. "I don't know how to be anyone's woman," she whispered. "You'll learn." "And I'll learn to be yours." She spun back toward him. "So this isn't just about a baby?" He stepped closer then. "It starts with the child, with building a name that doesn't die with me. But it's also about partnership. I've lived alone too long. If I have to face the rest of my days, I want someone beside me who's earned her place, not someone I bought, or broke, or bent into submission." Ella stared up at him, chest tight. His words weren't wrapped in romance. There were no sweet nothings or flowery promises. But there was honor in them, and honesty. She hadn't known how starved she was for both until this moment. "I need time," she said finally. He nodded. "Time you'll have." And with that, Lone Bear mounted his horse and rode off into the canyon, leaving her standing alone but not afraid. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a stray. She felt like a woman who'd been given something impossible. Choice. For the next few days, Ella found herself falling into a rhythm she never expected. She rose early, before the sun crested the canyon, swept out the dust from the floor, boiled water for washing, and cooked simple meals from what Lone Bear brought back. She mended her old dress with scraps of cloth he left without a word. He came and went like a hawk, silent, powerful, always watching. Yet every day he brought back more than just food: a pair of soft moccasins, a roll of fabric, a comb. One morning, a single wildflower. He never handed them to her directly. He simply left them where she would find them, on the stone table, by the fire pit next to her bedroll. Kindness without demand. Ella had never known such a thing. Still, a weight clung to her ribs like lead. She couldn't stop hearing the voices from her past, the madam who slapped her, the drunk men who pawed at her even when she said no, the women who told her she was lucky to be ignored because worse happened upstairs. That life had almost taken everything from her. Almost. And now here was a man offering not just safety but something sacred. A future. But could she ever be enough? It gnawed at her until she couldn't stay silent. One evening, she found Lone Bear sitting outside by the fire, sharpening a knife against a stone. The stars were just beginning to wink above them. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice low. He didn't look up, but he stilled the blade. "I'm listening." She sat across from him, hugging her knees to her chest. "I wasn't just homeless. I wasn't just wandering. I came from filth, Lone Bear. I've scrubbed floors soaked in blood and whiskey. I've been spat on. I've begged for scraps. I don't even remember what it feels like to be touched gently." His eyes rose to hers. "I've seen women die in that place. I thought I'd die there too. I was nothing more than part of the furniture." Her throat caught. "You say you see my spirit, but all I've ever felt is shame." Lone Bear didn't speak immediately. He set down the blade, looked at the stars, then back at her. "My wife died giving birth to our first child," he said. "A boy. He never took a breath. We buried them both beneath the white cedar by the North Ridge." Ella said nothing. Her breath slowed. "I lost my brother the winter before that smallpox. The younger one drank himself to death after the war. My father was murdered by landmen with a handshake and a lie. My mother faded when the last of our family was gone. I watched the people I love vanish one by one until there was no one left to bury me when my time comes." His voice didn't tremble, but it held an ache she could feel in her bones. "I've known shame too. I've known helplessness. I've known the kind of pain that makes a man dig his own grave just to see if it fits." Ella's eyes glistened in the firelight. "I tell you this," he said, "because I didn't pick you out of pity. I chose you because you didn't die. You still got up. You still fight. You think I want a woman untouched by hardship? That's not a wife. That's a ghost." She let the words settle. Her fingers tightened around her knees. "You think I can be someone worth carrying your name, your child? I know it." She shook her head, tears building. "Even if I say yes, I'm not soft. I don't know how to love like other women." He leaned forward. "Good, because I don't need softness. I need truth." Ella felt something shift inside her. Something tight and buried began to crack open. For so long, she had survived by staying small, by taking up less space. But this man, this mountain of a man, was offering her something. Not even the rich or the kind had ever given her dignity. He didn't try to fix her. He didn't pretend her past didn't exist. He simply sat beside it with her, and that was enough. That night, she slept not with fear at her back, but with warmth in her chest, because maybe, just maybe, she wasn't broken. She was just beginning. It wasn't a wedding. There were no vows, no guests, no rings, no flowers, no lace, no kiss. Just two people scarred, weary, and done with pretending the world was fair, sitting across from each other at a rough stone table, a stew pot bubbling quietly between them. Lone Bear said nothing. Ella said less. But when he pushed a carved wooden cup toward her, a gesture that held more weight than words, she nodded. And that was it, a deal struck with silence. From that day on, everything changed and nothing did. There was no sudden intimacy, no embrace beneath the moon. But now, when Lone Bear rode out to hunt, he left 2 bedrolls side by side. When Ella stirred the stew, she added extra herbs, his favorites, though he'd never once told her what he liked. He built a second chair out of worn pine and set it beside his at the fire. She took her meals there without asking. They didn't. Call it love. They called it living. She never moved into his space like a bride might. He never ordered her about like a husband would. Instead, they shared what little they had: land, food, silence, and glances that said more than any preacher's ceremony ever could. Ella scrubbed his shirts in the creek, sewed patches into his moccasins, even carved a small flute and left it on the windowsill, though she never said it was hers. Lone Bear picked it up one night and played a low, mournful melody that made her cry quietly beneath her blanket. Still, there were barriers. Invisible lines neither of them had the courage to cross. Their hands brushed when passing tools, but never lingered. They spoke about chores, weather, coyotes, or fences, but never about hearts or hurts, until one night. A storm rolled in from the west, howling through the canyon like the voice of old gods. Thunder cracked over the cliffs, and rain pounded against the earth like war drums. Ella had just pulled the furs tighter around her when a loud crash split the night. She rushed to the front of the shelter. The drying rack had collapsed, and Lone Bear was outside in the storm, hauling the meat into safety. He slipped once, his shoulder slamming against a rock. She ran to him without thinking, barefoot in the mud, hands outstretched. "You'll break your back, you stubborn ox." She shouted over the wind. He didn't argue, just handed her a bundle and nodded toward the door inside, soaked and shivering. They dropped the meat and stared at each other, breathing hard. Mud caked her legs. His shirt clung to him, rainwater dripping down his brow. And then she did something she never thought she'd do. She reached out and touched his chest, just above the heart. Not in desire, not in duty, but in recognition. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she whispered. Lone Bear's hand lifted slowly, cautiously, and covered hers. "Good," he said softly, "because I've never feared you." The silence between them wasn't empty now, it was sacred. She sat beside him near the fire, drying off, and he offered her a blanket from his own shoulders. Their hands stayed close, their knees touched. Neither pulled away. That night, she didn't sleep on the far bedroll. She didn't say a word. She simply lay down beside him, pressed her back to his chest, and felt the solid rhythm of his breath. He didn't reach. For her, he didn't push. He only rested his hand lightly against her hip, his thumb grazing the side of her waist like a promise, not of passion. Not yet, but of something deeper: partnership, safety, trust. In the morning, nothing had changed, but everything had changed. They still didn't speak of love. They didn't need to. The world had taken too much from them already. Now they were building something slow, careful, real. And though the deal had started with survival, it was growing into something more. Something like home. The days that followed passed gently, like slow-moving water smoothing jagged stone. The wind still blew cold through the canyon, but inside Lone Bear's shelter, warmth began to bloom, not just from the fire, but from small, unspoken things. Ella no longer flinched at every sudden sound. She no longer looked over her shoulder expecting someone to demand something or hurt her. She moved freely now, not like a guest or a burden, but like someone who belonged. And Lone Bear watched it all in quiet awe. He'd seen her starving. He'd seen her afraid. He'd seen her guarded and proud and filled with sorrow. But now he was seeing something new: a woman reclaiming herself. Piece by piece, Ella was stitching together a version of herself she never thought possible. She had weight in her cheeks again, color in her skin. And one morning, as she stepped outside and saw the shelter Lone Bear had been working on behind the main hut, A smile broke across her face. Not a tired, polite smile, not the kind she used to survive in the brothel, but a full, stunned, real smile. He saw it from a distance and stopped chopping wood. She turned to him, mouth open. "You're building me a cabin?" He nodded. "Not behind mine. Beside it." Her smile faded into something softer, grateful, moved. "I thought I'd just stay in your place. You can. But I wanted to give you something of your own. Space that's yours. To rest. To think. To choose." Her throat tightened. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had given her space, let alone choice. She stepped toward the half-built structure. It was small but solid. The foundation was already set, the beams rising like ribs toward the sky. There was a single, square window cut into the side. She touched the wood gently. "You did all this?" He nodded again, almost sheepishly. "Had to trade a few pelts for more nails." "But why?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "You already gave me everything." He finally met her eyes, his gaze steady. "Because when I look at you, I don't just see a woman who needs protection anymore. I see a woman who could. Run a home, raise a child, maybe even leave beside me. And a woman like that deserves walls of her own." She didn't cry. She didn't fall into his arms. Instead, she laughed. It came out shaky and full, like a forgotten sound that had been buried beneath too much silence. Lone Bear blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry," she said through the laughter, wiping her eyes. I didn't think I remembered how to laugh, how to feel like someone." He smiled too, just a little. His smiles were rare, quiet things, like the first bloom after a long drought. "You are someone, Ella." She stepped toward him, her voice firm now. "I want to earn this. I want to work beside you. Not just for food or shelter, but because I want to build this life with you." He looked at her and nodded once. "Then, we'll build it together." From that day on, they worked side by side, not just on the shelter, but on everything. He showed her how to ride bareback on the hill ponies. She taught him how to make soap from lard and lye. He hunted. She tanned hides. She painted simple designs on the walls of her cabin, swirls of sunrise and feathers, symbols from her past and his. The cabin became more than wood and nails. It became proof that two broken people could build something whole. And one morning, she placed her hand in his without needing a reason. Not for balance, not for fear. Just because she wanted to. He squeezed it gently, then whispered something into the morning light. "You're not my burden. You're my beginning." And this time, Ella didn't just smile. She glowed. The days were peaceful. The kind of peace that felt borrowed from heaven, so quiet, so rare, Ella sometimes found herself bracing for it to break. But Lone Bear never looked over his shoulder. He moved through each task like he trusted the earth. Beneath his feet, the wind in the canyons, and her. By now, her cabin was finished. She had painted the doorway with a symbol from his tribe, a rising sun over two joined trees. It was Lone Bear who suggested it. "We grow stronger side by side," he said simply. They weren't lovers in the way stories described. They hadn't crossed that final, physical line. But their bond was deeper than most couples she'd known. Their touch meant something when it came: a hand on the back, a palm over hers while gutting fish, a glance across the fire that said, "You matter here." One evening, while Lone Bear was off checking traps near the ridge, Ella sat outside with a basket of beans, sorting the dry from the spoiled. The wind had a strange edge to it, sharp, hot, wrong. She stood and scanned the sky. Smoke. Dark plumes in the distance, not from the chimney and not from the settler town either. It was coming from the north. Her heart pounded. She ran inside, grabbed Lone Bear's rifle, and waited. It was near dusk when she saw them, 4 riders on rough horses, moving fast down the old game trail kicking up dust. They weren't. From the town. She recognized the gear. Renegades. Bandits who roamed the borderlands, raiding isolated homesteads for food, weapons, or worse. She had seen their kind before. In the brothel, there were the ones no one wanted to serve. The kind that paid in pain. Not coin. Ella's hand shook as she loaded the rifle. The men didn't even dismount when they reached her fire pit. One of them laughed. Didn't expect a woman here. Pretty little thing, too. Another spat into the dirt. Where's the Apache? We saw his horse. This is woman? Ella raised the rifle. Keep riding. The men exchanged amused looks. You? Ever shot a man, girl? She aimed straight at the chest of the one nearest. I've killed worse things than men. They circled closer, one dismounting. And that's when Lone Bear returned. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He charged. The sound of his horse barreling down the trail was like thunder. He struck the first man with the butt of his bow, sent him flying. A second drew a pistol. Lone Bear grabbed his wrist and twisted until it snapped. One. Ryder tried to escape, but Ella, who once crawled in dirt begging for food, fired once and dropped his horse. The man limped off into the brush. The last bandit backed away. We were just looking for shelter. Lone Bear grabbed him by the collar and held his knife to the man's throat. You find it, he growled, in hell. He let the man go. By the time the bandits were gone, the fire was smoldering and the air tasted like sweat, smoke, and fear. Ella dropped the rifle, hands trembling. Lone Bear turned to her. You all right? She nodded. You? He bled from a cut on his cheek, but he didn't notice. She walked to him, placed a hand on his chest. Her voice cracked. I was ready to shoot. I would have killed them. He looked into her eyes. No, and I would have buried them beside the creek and carved their names myself if they touched you. She let out a shaky breath. I wasn't afraid for me. I was afraid for you. He pulled her to him, not roughly, not out of instinct, but like a man holding the most precious thing he'd ever known. I told you, he whispered, voice like gravel, we save each other. That night, while the wind howled and ashes cooled in the fire pit, Ella lay beside him in her cabin, not because she needed protection, but because she chose to be close. She'd never known this kind of love. Not the kind born from comfort or courtship, but forged in danger, defended with blood. And when she looked at him sleeping beside her, her heart whispered a truth she couldn't yet say aloud. She would rather die beside him than live without him. The storm passed, and with it, the old fear that Ella had carried for years. Something shifted after that night. It wasn't just the danger or the blood spilled, it was what came after. The quiet comfort of being held, not possessed. The way Lone Bear had looked at her when the fire dimmed, not with hunger, not with desperation, but with respect. And something that scared her even more. Hope. She rose early the next morning, brushing ashes from the hearth and boiling coffee over the fire. Lone Bear was already outside, repairing the broken fence from the bandits' stampede. She brought him a tin cup, but he didn't take it right away. Sit with me, he said. She did, cross-legged on the stone steps. The sun was still low, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but heavy with something unspoken. Finally, she said, I've been waiting for you to change your mind. He looked at her, confused. For you to see me how others do, she said. A body. A burden. A bed warmer. I figured sooner or later you'd stop seeing a partner and start seeing a purpose. Lone Bear stared ahead for a moment, then slowly turned to face her. You think I chose you just to make an heir? Her voice was small. Isn't that why you said I was here? I said I needed a child, he replied quietly. That's true. I need my name to go on. But I never said that's all I needed. She looked down at her hands. He reached out and placed his hand gently over hers. "You're not just a womb to me, Ella." Her breath caught. "I've known women who could give me sons. Women who threw themselves at me for land, for protection. I didn't choose them. I chose you." "Why?" she whispered. "Because you don't just carry life, you carry strength. Because when you speak, I listen. Because you've survived what would have broken many. You don't just have fire. You have roots." She blinked, tears welling. "But I'm not healed. I still wake up afraid sometimes. I still don't know how to love right." His thumb brushed the back of her hand. "Love doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be real. That's enough for me." She laughed softly, wiping a tear. "No one's ever said anything like that to me. I mean it." "I know," she said. "That's what scares me." He nodded, understanding. That afternoon, they worked side by side, again repairing tools, moving stones from the garden beds, speaking little, but feeling much. That evening, Ella cooked stew and added wild garlic he'd brought home. It filled the shelter with rich, familiar warmth. After they ate, she stood by the doorway, watching the stars. He came up behind her, close but not touching. "You asked me once if I was ready to carry your name," she said. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I want to try. I want it to mean something." He stepped beside her, not in front of her. "It already does." And then, for the first time, she kissed him slow. Sure, not as a promise to give him a child. Not as a reward for kindness, but as a woman who had chosen her place in the world, and the man who had made room for her in it. That night, there was no awkwardness. No rush. No demands. Just two people laying down the weight of their pasts and holding each other like home. In the early hours, before the sun rose, she whispered into his chest, "If we're lucky and the child comes." I wanted to know this. Wasn't a bargain. It was the start of everything. He kissed the crown of her head. "Then we've already given our child the greatest gift." "What's that?" "A mother who knows her own worth." Winter was gentle that year. As if even the seasons knew not to disturb what was growing between Lone Bear and Ella, their days moved with quiet purpose. The garden plots were prepared for spring. The goats had fresh straw in the pen. Ella mended a shirt while Lone Bear carved a cradle from cedar wood. The smell of it filled the cabin sharp and clean, like something holy. By mid-February, she knew. Her body changed first tiredness that pulled her down like gravity, an ache in her chest that no rest could soothe. She said nothing for days, unsure if it was real, afraid to speak it into the air. She wasn't used to hope. Hope was fragile. One morning, Lone Bear placed a hand gently on her back as she stood at the fire. "Stirring beans. You're moving." "Like the earth's heavier than it used to be," he said, soft as a breeze. She set the spoon down, turned. "I think." Her voice wavered. "I think we're going to be parents." He didn't speak, didn't blink. Just stepped closer and wrapped his arms around her, holding her tighter than he ever had. And then, something neither of them expected happened. He laughed. A deep, full sound bursting from somewhere he hadn't reached in years. It wasn't wild or loud, it was free. Ella stared up at him, stunned. "You're laughing," she whispered. "I forgot I could," he said, voice choked with joy. She laughed too, suddenly, helplessly. Tears ran down both their faces, but they didn't wipe them away. They let them fall, let themselves feel it all. For the first time, Ella wasn't bracing for bad news. She was letting happiness in. The months that followed were the most sacred of her life. Lone Bear became gentler than she thought a man of his size and past could ever be. He massaged her back with wild mint leaves. He found soft berries she craved, and rode 2 hours just to bring her fresh linens from the trading post. He whittled toys without her asking and hung them above the cradle like tiny wooden blessings. And Ella, in turn, opened more than her body. She opened her soul. She sang softly in the evenings, old songs from her childhood. She painted feathers and stars on the cabin wall and whispered promises to the life growing inside her. "I'll never leave you," she said one night, resting her hand over her belly. "Even if the world turns cruel again, I'll stay." Lone Bear came up behind her, placing his hand over hers. "We'll both stay." The baby came with the first snowfall, quiet, steady, and honest. Ella labored in their home, not screaming or panicked, but focused and fierce. Lone Bear knelt beside her, his strong hands cradling her, grounding her. When the child's first cry broke the silence, they both cried too, not in fear, but in pure, unshaken wonder. "It's a girl." Ella breathed. Lone Bear stared at the tiny child, wide-eyed and shaking with emotion. "She's perfect." He wrapped her in a blanket Ella had sewn by hand, then held her close, the weight of generations settling into his arms. For the first time in his life, Lone Bear felt whole. Ella looked up at him, exhausted but radiant. "What do we name her?" He knelt beside her and whispered, "Nalina." Ella blinked. "What does it mean?" "Little one who brings light," she smiled, tears falling freely. "Then it's true." That night, the three of them curled close by the fire, mother, father, daughter, beneath a sky that no longer looked empty. And outside the cabin, snow fell soft and slow over the canyon, like a blessing the earth had been waiting years to give. Spring came late, but when it did, it came like a promise fulfilled. The canyon bloomed with desert flowers, fiery orange and soft lavender, as if the earth itself had painted a welcome for little Nalina. Birds returned, and with them came songs Ella hadn't heard in years. Every day, the sun warmed their land, and with it, their hearts. Lone Bear built a small shelter beside the main cabin, a smokehouse, then a pen for chickens. He worked with a quiet pride now, never rushing, never angry. He had what he once believed he'd never earn: a family, a future, a woman who had not only stayed, but risen with him. Ella, once skeletal and scared, now moved with certainty. She wore long skirts she had sewn herself, hair braided with colored thread. Nalina rode on her back in a wrap, clinging to her mother's heartbeat. Her laughter echoed through the canyon like music. No longer a shadow, no longer nameless. Ella was someone now. One morning, as Lone Bear saddled his horse, Ella walked out with Nalina on her hip. The baby had just begun to walk shaky steps, bold spirit. She reached for her father, and Lone Bear leaned down, letting her tug at his thick braids. "You riding far today?" Ella asked. He looked toward the distant ridge. "Only to the northern fence line. Thought I'd check for breaks." Ella nodded, then said something she hadn't dared before. "Take me with you." Lone Bear paused. "You sure?" She smiled. "I've spent enough time surviving. I want to live." He grinned, hoisting her up behind him. Nalina was strapped safely against Ella's chest, curious eyes peering at the world. Together, they rode across the land that had once felt like a prison to Ella and now felt like a kingdom. As they passed through the village, something happened that made Ella's breath catch. The elders stepped out of their homes. Women who once whispered about the white girl who didn't belong now nodded in respect. One old man even raised a hand and said in Apache, "Mother of the new blood." Ella didn't know all the words, but she understood the meaning. Lone Bear nodded back, proud. The people had begun to see it too. What they had built wasn't weakness or desperation. It was strength forged through suffering. And now it stood tall on solid ground. Later that evening, back at the cabin, Lone Bear sat beside the fire, carving a wooden necklace for Nalina. Ella laid nearby, nursing their daughter, her face lit by the warm flames. He looked over at her. "I used to think I needed an heir to keep my name alive," he said. "And now?" she asked. I know better now. I don't just want my name passed on, I want you passed on. What we built. The kind of love that wasn't born in comfort, but in fire. Ella looked at Nalina's peaceful face and whispered, Then we've already won. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the fire crackle, to the breathing of their child, to the soft wind brushing the canyon walls. This was no fairy tale ending. The world was still rough. Droughts would come. Raiders might return. Life, as always, would demand everything, but they weren't afraid. Any more. They had each other. They had love. They had legacy. And in the years to come, as Nalina grew and learned to ride, to speak both her mother's and father's tongues, to be wild and wise and brave, they would tell her how it all began. Not with romance. But with a proposition between two broken souls, and the courage to choose one, another anyway.